expendable. Okay, time was my expendable. I could not let my controllers take it away from me because basically I had a clock and I had to make a decision by that time. Well, it's sort of like a football team down in the red zone. Quarterback's got 2 minutes down there towards the end of the game. Does he use the time well? Does he let his team screw around to the point where he ends up not scoring? So it's interesting.
Time is a tool. It's a friend. It's an enemy. It certainly is an entity.
Well, you notice all the clocks we had up in mission control. We had a clock for every event.
Sure.
We got a clap. On 3.
Clap.
2, 3. Okay, just ignore the cameras.
Okay, look very professional now. Sit upright in the chair.
You'll be
That's
just
what the
fine.
barber says. Will you please sit upright?
All right. Mr. Kranz, for this beginning part, could you just say your name and then your title for the Apollo series?
Okay, when are we rolling?
We're rolling.
Rolling.
you're rolling?
And look at me, ignore all the cameras.
I'm Gene Kranz. I was a flight director in mission control. Flight directors got the job to take any actions necessary for crew safety and mission success. There's no equivocation. It's go or no go. Virtually everything that we do in our business in mission control. First 3 teams picked the colors red, white, and blue. Red was Chris Kraft. John Hodge, an Englishman, surprisingly, was the blue flight director, and I was the flight director. A lot of them called me White Blight, not White Flight.
Today is a very special day. Thank you so much for being here and for taking time for us. And it is certainly an honor to be sitting with you today, and I want you to know that, and I want that on record.
Okay.
But this season is going to be decades, 5 decades after a huge moment in American history. And I have to ask, what are these months, this time of year like for you?
I think for a lot of us, I think it's an opportunity to savor the first lunar landing. My team, as soon as we hit the moon, the crew said, Houston Tranquility Base here, the Eagles landed. We had to go for the next 2 hours. While the word's celebrating, people behind me in the viewing room are celebrating. They're cheering, they're stomping their feet. Basically, we had to take a look at that spacecraft and make time-critical decisions. 2 minutes, are we stay or no stay? 8 minutes, stay or no stay? 2 hours, stay or no stay? At which time then we would hand over to the next team and we could join the rest of the world in celebration. So it was a very dicey time, but it's a time that I think that we are going to really relish because we're getting on in the years, and we did the job, and we're very proud of the work we did. And as a team, we hung tough.
Talk to me about that day. Talk to me about those moments when you realize you're doing something that man has never done before.
The real challenge was to keep your perspective and not get distracted. The thing that was interesting about mission control, do you want to wait till you get rid of that background noise there? What the hell are they doing now?
Hammering something.
Okay, what was the question again?
Well, good? Okay.
Okay.
Let's take you back to that day. Let's take you back to that moment. And obviously you have a really unique, walk of life, a mindset, and looking at things in a very unique perspective. What was that moment? Describe to me, because the people who are watching today were not in that room. What was it like when you realized that you're landing on the moon?
It was, the descent was roughly about 12 minutes long, and it was a battle. It was a battle all the way there. We had problems with communications. I had mission rules that basically laid the burden upon me to say, do we have enough data to continue? We have no crash recorder, so if we lose the spacecraft for some reason, we have to have enough information to know what happened so we can fix it and go back. And about the time we got that sorted out, my trajectory team tells me we're going to be landing long. We've got a radial component of velocity error in there, and we're moving towards our abort limit, but we'll watch it pretty close. From then on, it's now looking, are we going to get the landing radar? Because the crew is descending to the moon with information we've provided them from the ground, which could have been several thousand feet in air. And if you're going to land on the moon, you got to know what the altitude is down there. So we had to wait for that radar to come in. And about the time that got sorted out, we started having problems with computer program alarms. And this was, I think, probably the most difficult time because everybody recognized that this crew, that the spacecraft, and the crew was now in a spacecraft where the computer was basically running out of time to do all the functions it had to do. So it basically shedded all the less important, and it was now providing the proper trajectory steering, guidance, navigation, control. And then we'd recover with the computer and we'd say, we're through that. And about it to happen again, and then again. And now it's getting to the point where we're down close to the ground and the crew has to start picking out their landing site. They know they landed long, and they have a computer provides them information where they can look out through a grid on their window. It's called the landing point designator, and say, hey, this is where you're going to land, and I don't like that. I'm going to try it. So now they're starting to fly around close to the surface. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have driven with fuel gauge in their car reading empty. And that's basically when you get the report from the crew low level. We know the crew has 2 minutes of fuel remaining at a 30% throttle setting. So normally in training, we would have landed by the time we got that low level. But now we're proceeding on down towards the surface, and very soon one of my controllers is going to start counting down the seconds of fuel remaining. And you wait for that call. The room becomes almost totally silent at that time. And I got one controller is counting down, he's got a stopwatch there, and he'll say 60 seconds. And we're listening to that crew. They're still flying around trying to find a landing point, and Buzz is calling out whether he's moving forward, right, left, up, down. He's calling out the information to Buzz. Now, the thing that's interesting, I did not know this at the time, but this sheet of dust that basically is flowing along the lunar surface is making it difficult for the crew, Neil Armstrong, to decide which direction he's moving, how fast he's moving. So he has to find stationary objects like big rocks down there, and that is now what he uses for his reference. And then we hear 30 seconds. And in mission control, we have handles on the television in there. You grab that handle and you're holding on for life on that thing there as we now count down. About the time we would have said 15 seconds, we recognize the crew's going through engine shutdown. And the emotion of that instant, when we then hear the crew say, Houston Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. I think we were all unprepared for it. Now, I'd been through the simulation. We'd done that many times. And I think myself and my team were ready, but the people in the viewing room were what broke the code. They started stamping and cheering and everything else. All of a sudden, this noise filters into the room, and my controllers start to catch it. And I get angry, and I say, okay, settle down. All of a sudden, the control team goes quiet, understand. Then we start going through the stay, no stay decisions. So we look at that spacecraft, and at 2 minutes, we give the crew their stay for T1. We go through another 6 minutes, or stay for T2. And these times were selected such that if we had to get off the moon, the spacecraft, the lunar module, ascent stage, could lift off and rendezvous with the command module. In between the times, command module would have to do part of the maneuvering. So basically, these times are very critical. And it was only after we got to 2 hours, I handed over to the next team, and we could begin our celebration. So this is a very precious time for, I think, everyone in the room, because we'd like to do it over again, only join the rest of the world celebrating the landing when we really did it when we landed. So it was a sort of a dicey time, but the response of the controllers and the team was absolutely beautiful. These kids, these are most of 26, 27-year-old in there. They've been in mission control for about 3 to 4, maybe 5 years in there. And they're hardcore professionals, everything they did. I mean, they are sharp, they're crisp, they're on top of the job. And I'm so darn proud of those kids I could croak. The thing that was interesting, I had the opportunity just before we started down to talk to my team. I'm probably the most emotional of the flight directors, and we have a private communications loop where I can talk to the controllers. And my final words to my controllers were, I will stand behind every decision you will make. We came into this room as a team, and we will leave as a team. And then one of my controllers went and locked the control room doors, and we would not leave that room, and the doors would not be open until we'd either landed, we'd crashed, or we aborted. And only one of those cases was good. We had to land.
Now, you also taught those young men and women, and you taught them two values that I think have shaped NASA today, and that is tough.
Tough and competent. Boy, you got those words. Well, thank you. That is, it came from a point, many of us went through the Apollo 1 fire, where we lost Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. I was the flight director the previous day's test, and I did the morning test, and then handed over to Chris Kraft. But I had been through. I had lost pilots in my squadron. I was familiar with death. In aircraft flight test, we lost several people. And basically, I had to find some way to get my team back on track and get going. But we also had to accept the responsibility that we were not ready. At the time we were in that countdown, any one of us could have said, whoa, stop. The crew could have done that, program could have done that, launch team could have done that, I could have done that. We're not ready, we're not good enough, things aren't right. It's time to turn this thing around. And I called my controllers in 2 days later and talked to them rather lengthy, very private, but it was to the point of saying we must accept responsibility for this failure and we must never let it happen again. When you leave this room, you'll write 2 words on the blackboard, tough and competent, and you will not erase those words until we have completed the Apollo program. And that became sort of a rallying cry. It was, everybody thought, Kranz does sort of, I won't say silly things, but basically when he does things, he means them. And tough and competent carried over for a long time. Everybody gave me a tough and competent jersey. Pretty soon everybody was wearing it, their jackets, et cetera. But this was a time frame where I think we became hard, still hard, in everything that we needed to do to get our crews to the surface of the moon.
50th anniversary. You had mentioned to me when we were not recording, just that it didn't feel like 50 years.
No, it's really strange. I guess it goes with the aging process. I'm now 86, but I don't feel 86. I feel maybe I'm 50 or so, and it's the same thing from a standpoint of major events that not only myself, but my controllers were involved with. We've celebrated this every year since the time we first landed on the moon, but it doesn't seem that it's the 50th year. It might be even the 8th or 10th year, maybe the 20th year. And we look at each other and we still tell the same stories. We're a bit older, we're a bit slower, but we lived in what I call our time. This was a time that was, I think, unique. Our nation was in motion. You think about going to the moon, but also think the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, and basically people were out, the Peace Corps. People would get out of their comfort zone and they would march for what they believed. And we just happened to be the marchers that were marching for the business of space.
Do you still keep in contact with your family, your flight family, your NASA family?
I see them every day. The flight family became very real to me. I did a talk up at the Smithsonian. And the one thing that has been a constant irritation to me is NASA never developed a film that focused upon the controllers during the lunar landing. And in the business of the restoration of mission control, we found a disc that had some old 16 millimeter film, just snapshots, vignettes, just snapping around there. And I saw my controllers in ways I'd never seen them before. I was busy at my console, but now I could see these guys working. I could see them giving thumbs up, passing stuff around. And the thing was, it was so beautiful that what I did is I took this and made my own silent movie. I made a 12-minute silent movie of the 16 millimeter Cygnets. And basically what I did then is I narrated it when I was up at the Smithsonian for the landing. And I had the many things I learned in that. I had my log, I had the air-ground voice and the Mission Control Center voice. But the one thing I found that was very interesting was to put what Neil Armstrong was thinking at various times during this event. And it was interesting, at the time he had that first computer program alarm, he did what every good pilot does. He focused totally and entirely in flying that airplane. And he was really hard over to not make sure that that guy was going to be lost. He was, and his crew weren't going to be lost there. And basically, he didn't look at his landing site at there. He was keeping that spacecraft under control in case the machine would belly up on him. And like I say, I did not recognize that, and that delayed him from picking his landing site out much later in the descent. But this was a good process of learning for me and getting to know my people again. I mean, watch them and also the bosses. I ought to say a few words about our leadership. Throughout this early space program, we had the most incredible leaders because they had the ultimate responsibility and accountability. I thank Chris Kraft for giving me the opportunity to be the landing flight director. This was a marvelous job, but he gave me that responsibility. And our bosses in those days were more like, how can I help you? I don't want more briefings. I don't need any more. I don't need explanations. Tell me what happened and then let me figure out how to give you a hand. Leadership was incredible in those days.
Yeah, I talked to Chris Kraft, and I think it's incredible the sight that you have as a leader, and saying, I think this person, we want him in that role, and that ended up being you, and now look, the rest is history. But I did think it was interesting that in this discovery of renovating Mission Control, that someone who went through it also learned.
Yeah.
But you wanted to share this so that everyone else could learn. Can you talk to me about how the restoration of MOCR 2 came about?
We had I'm trying to think of the exact term. We have a young lady, Sandra Tetley, who basically has the responsibility for the protection of the historic properties. And she got a message, a letter from the National Park Service that indicated they're going to declare Mission Control an endangered facility. And basically, she got a hold of me, and I formed a small team, very small group of around 5 people, roughly 2 people, myself and Ed Fendel. And we proceeded now to start carrying that ball. And it was really not pleasurable. We had difficulties with Johnson Space Center. We had difficulties, no money in the place. But we fought literally for about 4 years. I wrote enough letters to people until finally the Christmas before we got started, I wrote 27 letters to every state and federal historic group, one of which was received up in Washington. And it was basically, my theme was Save Mission Control. I used the media to do this. The Chronicle did some reporting that was very beneficial to us. But basically, the gentleman in Washington just finished a book on the historic properties down at the Cape. So he went over and talked to the acting administrator, and the next day we started getting action. And then I was sitting over here as we were trying to figure out some other issues related to the restoration. I was sitting over in the room down there where they show the movies before you come into this area right now. And all of a sudden, basically the boss, Mr. Harris and Lamb, come down from Space Center Houston, sit down, and we start talking. And they get now interested in this thing here, and then they just pulled off a miracle and started getting the flood in, money coming in, and Webster came in. I didn't have a clue what a Kickstarter was, but I got volunteered for Kickstarter. I mean, I got raffled off for $10,000, and I think we did 12 or 15 people that are paying that kind of money to get in here. But basically, the whole motion started in this thing here. And once you get something like this moving, you can't stop it. And it's now to the point where you walk over into Mission Control, we have the exact carpeting that was in there, made by the same manufacturer. We had the wallpaper. The only thing that they changed that a lot of us had strong opinions on, was the air vents up there were literally black with nicotine tar. And what we wanted to do is keep at least one of those dirty, not cleaned. I mean, we smoked cigarettes, pipes, cigars in that room right on down the line. And but that was the nature of the beast. It had its own, almost an uncanny atmosphere when you walked in. You knew you were in a different place. And you also had the feeling when you walked in there that you knew that decisions were made in this place. You had a sense of history of that room and setting America's first bait records, beating the Russians, capturing the high ground. And I think that this entire process of restoration is going to be good, not only for the people that were there, but basically it's the opportunity to show that what America will dare, America can do. And I think it's essential within our nation to start getting this belief that we can dream big things and we can set out and we can do big things. They talk about infrastructure, well, let's go do about it. Let's talk about prescription prices, let's do something about it. Let's make things happen in our nation.
If you'll allow me, please take me to the restoration of Mission Control. And you talk about how this piece of history is affecting the future and how you want it to affect the future. Can you talk to me about what it was like in that room, that the values that you want to share with people when they walk through it? The future generations who will look at this room, the nostalgia, the history.
Boy, I'll tell you what, you're really primed for this. I love this question, which is really great. Everybody looks at Mission Control in a different context. Chris Kraft compares it to a cathedral. Ed Fendel will basically talk about, he's one of the guys that worked with restoration, as a museum. He talks about Appomattox, and he talks about the Civil War facilities. Basically, I look at it as a leadership laboratory where we take young people in there, green as grass, fresh out of college, and we turn men and women into controllers. Okay, they develop the abilities to step up to and make incredibly complex, difficult, time-critical, irrevocable decisions in a matter of seconds. When they see a team member that's having problems, they find a way to go over and give them a hand. They're absolutely honest, ruthless honesty. You don't know what it is until you're being beat up by members of your own team during a debriefing because you did not say it perfectly about what happened. And they have to depend upon you for the exact statement. Here's what I'm doing, here's why I'm going to do it, here's what I see, etc. Ruthless honesty and debriefing of training runs, extremely important. So it's a unique place to live and grow and learn, but you develop a ability in that room that basically allows you to cope with whatever happens for the rest of your life. You have made the tough decision, so everything else from then on is a lot easier.
And I also want to talk about integrity of history. I think that's very important, and it's certainly the value that runs my job.
Okay.
Can you talk I know that this is restoring 5 different facilities. It's also going to Hutchinson, Kansas. Talk to me about how authentic this place will be, other than the tar at the top.
We're still trying to figure out who's going to smoke the cigarettes so we can put the cigarettes and the ashes in the trays, because apparently they don't do that nowadays. But basically, we're going to have the same materials. Now, the copies of the same materials, because they're incredibly valuable. Many things have been lost, so we have to go back in and recreate them. But basically, our intention is to have it look exactly like it was the day we left after Apollo 11. This will basically have the, I think, the little cheat sheets we used to have. You know, every place that we had on the console that didn't have something hung on it, we put a piece of plastic over it and we used grease pencil to write notes to ourselves on. Under the console there, we had the sheets for the instrument panel and the spacecraft of the world map. When you walk in there, this doesn't look like it isn't a very pretty place. It's sort of a messy place. We got maps hanging up behind the consoles. We got logs filled up. The only thing lacking in there is going to be the covers that I have for my the notebooks I had, because I had several notebooks, and in those days I used Sports Illustrated edition for the covers, and these were so important to me I was afraid of losing them. And if I lost that book, I basically would feel incapable of flying a mission. So basically, you're going to have these little things that controllers use to personal. It's like your own personal office. You put pictures, you put things in there. The consoles are going to be personalized the way they were the day we landed.
And there are certain pieces that I kind of want to transition to that are very important, not just to, you know, the storytelling of this. The vests, you know, the vests, other than mission control, can you talk to me about the vests?
Vests are, my wife is pretty good with the needle and thread, and fighter pilots always wear, you see all the movies, they got their scarves on. And they do this because you're constantly looking around. You got to check above you, later down the line, and the flight suits can become very raw after a couple of days, and it's sweaty and grody. So basically, you use these vests. They have a purpose in there, but they also have their own little mystique. And when I made flight leader over in Korea, my wife made me a scarf, and I had her make scarves for the rest of the people that were in my flight. This basically, if you take a look at George Patton, you know, his helmet, you look at MacArthur with his hat and the pipe that he had in there, you look about President Roosevelt, you know, you just find that they have something that characterizes, it's an identifier. My bosses in flight test had identifiers. One had the most colorful bow ties and suspenders he wore out there. Another one wore an Aussie hat. Colonel Gabreski, squadron commander down there, drove a white Jeep, not the military color, but basically that was, let his people know that he was interested in visiting all parts of his base, all parts of his unit. So you knew when Gabby was around. Well, they're the same thing. So I came around time for my first flight, and my wife suggested that she made a vest for me, and it would be white, which is my team color. And I didn't think that was too good idea. I mean, it's just, you sort of hate to call attention to yourself in this kind of a role. But anyway, you tell your wife, I'm gonna do that. So I took it in. And the thing that was interesting, I put it on at launch minus 9 minutes. You have a hold in the countdown. That's the last restroom break, so everybody goes off, gets the smoke, comes back. And I got this white vest on. And the controller next to me calls down to one of the guys down in the bowels of the building. And all of a sudden, I am on every television in mission control, every television in the press area, every television in Washington in there. And so you look and say, oh my God, what they do. Well, the team loved this. I mean, this just fit the team. And now it wasn't the Kranz team, it was the white team. I was, what do you do in mission control? I'm a member of the white team. So this was the nature of the beast. And there were a couple missions that were extremely difficult. One of which was the Gemini 9 mission. It was a basket case, but we kept all the pieces together. We satisfied most of the objectives. So I went home and asked my wife to make a celebration vest. And she didn't have any material. Well, what happened when I come back from Korea, I brought her one of these beautiful silk robes with gold and silver brocade. She cut the bottom off that robe and made a vest out of me. So that was the Gemini 9 vest. She made the end of Apollo vest, the red, white, and blue, and I used it several times during Apollo and other missions, which was a metallic thread. But basically, the vests had their own mystique also to the team, because the team, when I put that vest on, they knew we're about ready to start our shift. And it was interesting in this thing. I didn't have any clue what these vests were worth until the movie came around, and it had to be appraised before we sent it out there. And the vest was priced at $15,000. The problem is that we got 6 kids, 5 girls, and they went to a lot of Girl Scout raffles to make a bit of money there. And about a couple of years before the movie came out, I had to clean my closet, and I got rid of about 15, put them in the rag bag down to the thrift shop. So
somewhere,
somewhere. Yeah, but nobody had a clue. They're probably made for washing cars.
Did you know that KPRC2 had been the station that helped broadcast that the Eagle has landed?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's just, the media. The thing that was so amazing was we could look at TV for the next week, it seemed. Every day they'd have snapshots of the mission and what we were doing and who had done it. I think the media was doing a very beneficial. They were beautiful. I mean, frankly, go back into the media. I hate to talk about the media, but after each shift, we would have a press conference. And the beauty of this thing is this was a very professional media group they were working with. They were the space and science reporters right under the specialists we had. So we developed, I won't say a rapport with them, we developed a mutual respect. If they asked the right question, we would give them the answer. But if they didn't ask the right question, we'd just know them. And it was but basically we developed a trusting relationship down there. They didn't make the story, they reported the story. So this was a time frame, I think, within our nation that there was today there's so much distrust of the media, but basically this was the source of information. We didn't have a CNN and we didn't have a Fox and all these other alternatives. We didn't have an internet. The media was how things were communicated. So it was a great time to grow up.
Did it make you proud knowing that, you're here, this is where you lived, and this is where we're making an impact on the world? What is your, we're a local station. This means a lot, not just to the people who are watching, but the people who have an invested interest in being here with their life. They invested their life here.
Holy cow. That got your attention.
You're doing great, Gene.
You talk about investing your life here. I think, first of all, I love Houston. I love it because it provides everything I need. To me, it is not, I don't look after the sun, the surf, the beach, right or not. It's a place to do work. It's a place where I like the community that I live in. It's convenient. It's got all the things that you like. It's got great media coverage in here. And I'm sort of getting off track on this topic here, so get me back on track.
We will get you back on track. But no, I thought that was very much, you answered my question is, your pride about being here in Houston and the fact that Houston did this, that this space city did this.
Well, it was, when it was interesting, go back 60 seconds here. We were in Virginia when we got the word that we're going to go to Houston. I was talking to Chris Kraft yesterday, and I said, Chris, I don't think you really understood what you did to us. You said, this reminds me of Patton and the Third Army going to basically respond to the Battle of the Bulge down there. Kraft says, we're moving to Houston, and I sent some controllers down here, and we actually started off in South Houston. I said, I want you to go down and find 11, it turned out to be 15 by the time we finished, 11 homes down there that we can all afford, and government salaries down there, and just get the contracts and we'll send them all up there. So basically we called it Flight Controller Alley. And but then we start moving. They start moving out there, and we're in the Houston Petroleum Center. We used to be in the Oshman's warehouse down there. And it was interesting is that we put everything we owned in a U-Haul trailer, drove down to the Cape, launched Wally Schirra, drove into Houston, set up home, and then basically went back to work. And we were used to living this way. We were gypsies. My wife raised 3 kids, without really much attention from her husband.
Sounds very logistical. Set up home, then go back to work.
Yeah.
But you called Houston home for a reason.
Oh, Houston has been home my whole life. It's a very proud city. I like the way Houston recovers from down times. I think about this was an oil city and how they responded to the problems and basically expand the base they're working to. I like the way they responded to the floods they had in there. Basically, Houston is a we city rather than an I city. It is we as a community, basically, and I think we've had the leadership through the years that basically allows this city to prosper. People want to live in the Houston area. I mean, it's just a marvelous place.
What do you think about Houston's future with space and let's talk about the future of space. Where do you think this community stands with our mission to go to the moon and Mars again?
I think the Houston is well positioned for the same reasons that Johnson Space Center came here. Basically, it has its communications node, its transportation node. You got major universities around here. You got University of Houston, you got Rice, and then you got A&M, you got the Aggies up there, then you got the Longhorns, you can go up to the Texas Raiders. And if you keep going north, you get into the other colleges there. When I recruited my people, my recruiting area was the central United States. And this is just a marvelous source of very talented, but not stuck-up people. I mean, these are people who used to working with their hands, their minds, and making things happen. And I think if I think of all the farm boys, I went up and talked to Southwest Oklahoma State College, provided me 19 controllers and 3 flight directors. An obscure college, okay, down near the Panhandle, okay? But this was the kind of people that we needed to join into space. These were people who were in some way entrepreneurs, they were scientists, but they were capable of looking at a problem and saying, I think I can solve that. Let me give it a shot, let me give it a try. And if I need some help, I'll come and ask for you. So it was the people component that I think is represented in the Houston area, and in particular the state of Texas. I think it's just wonderful.
And you talk about, digging into what you talked about before, about how there was an attitude. What do you think is the attitude and those values that existed in the Apollo era that will make us successful in going to Mars? Is it the grit? Is it the sense of duty? Is it this generational connection? What do you think it'll take, those values, for us to actually go to Mars?
I think I'm really a moon person, but I could go except Mars. But basically, I think the thing that's interesting, most of the books have been written on how to do these things. The technology is certainly there. It's much better, far better, orders of magnitude better than what we had. We have young people trained in these technologies. We have the universities who basically have the knowledge base to continue to actually work out some of the details we need. Radiation is one of the threats here. Houston's big medical city, good medical base. Basically what we need is the top level leadership. All the instruments are there. What we need is someone to come up and say, look, this is what we're going to do. And I don't think it's going to be just us. It's going to be international. And I think if we're going back to the moon and Mars, we have to find some way to wrap our arms around the freedom-loving people in this world and build an international organization, an international momentum that's going to say, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it for the economic benefit of our country, not for the benefits, basically, of political right on down the line. for the knowledge that we can gain to learn how to survive in difficult environment, to build the technologies where things don't fail on you, they fail ops. Because if you're going to be a long distance away, you need things that are going to work for a long period of time. You need people to address problems that we can't even foresee now, but are going to be out in the future. We need that knowledge base to allow our community, our civilization to proceed. And I think we can do that by doing difficult things. Moon and Mars are difficult things. And I think standing up to saying, hey, this is something we're going to do for the good of all mankind, sort of like Neil Armstrong's words. But basically, this is something that we can do to address global warming. I think it's real. Going to address how are we going to turn these deserts into lands that are capable of being cultivated? How can we regenerate the water, recycle the ocean? We got tons of water out there, but it's all salt water. How do we make it usable in an entirely different fashion like they do over in Israel? I think there's all kinds of opportunities out there, but we need to establish the challenge that is going to force it. We need to do difficult things to learn how to do difficult things.
And it's funny because that theme carries you through every single topic. Actually taking action, doing, making plans, but also follow through. And I can see that in your personality, which is, I guess, what made you perfect to be a flight director.
Yeah,
One thing I wanted to ask about, 18 years ago, you did an interview with Space.com, and you had mentioned that, well, we need to explore these planets because, our planet, may not be in the best condition. But and 18 years ago, you thought we need to be fearless and explore. What is your message? That was 18 years ago. Now, someone who was born in that year is 18 years old now. What's your message to the 18-year-old, the young people, the future space explorers?
Very good question. And I think the thing that we have to get into young people's minds is they have to be willing to risk to move forward. If they're not willing to risk, they're marching in place. They're just standing there. They have to take a risk to earn some money for education. And education is going to provide them the knowledge to take even greater risks to move off into the future. It's going to provide them the knowledge to raise families, to educate their families right down the line. So I think that the risk is the price of progress. And if you're not moving, you're dying.
Simply put.
Yeah.
Just a quick time check.
Sure.
It's 11:08, Gene. Are you good on time to ask and have
I didn't even know it was 11:08. We've just been talking here.
I know
Okay.
it.
11:08. We've got some water if you need to have a sip.
Can I have 10 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we'll do it.
Just want to make sure I'm just getting through everything here. One question, I want to make sure to touch at least one, because there's some topics that they wanted to make sure that I ask about. But what was life like during? Take me back to the 1960s, 1970s. What was life like? What was the nostalgia of space? Were people excited about it? Were people waiting outside their radios to listen to what's happening there? This is a fun question because I'm really interested in this.
It was hard to find something. If I go back into the 60s, it was hard to find something that wasn't tied into space. I'll go back to my first indicator of space. I was a fighter pilot. And in 1958, Soviets launched Sputnik. And basically, I got out of my aircraft. My crew chief told me, the Russians launched a Sputnik. And I said, well, what's a Sputnik? He says, well, it's something that goes around the Earth that goes beep, 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 beep. And I said, well, okay, that's it. I forgot about it, never thought about it. But I went into downtown, I don't know whether it was Tokyo, which one of the cities, but literally within a couple weeks, I had a little wind-up toys of Sputnik. You could wind them up, kids could put them down right or down the line. And you started seeing the world pick up this thing of space as a result of this instrument, this ball which is just circling the Earth. They had the astronomy, they had pointing data when you could look at it. People were out looking at it. So this was one of the magic. It captured the imagination. Space captures the imagination. You can take a look at some of the movies. One of my favorite movies is one called Running Silent. It's a space movie. It's really an old-time one, but it really is talking about sometime in the future they're going to transport all the various living elements on Earth that are growing elements, plants and all that, put it up in space and have this beautiful platform up there, so they preserved it. But the United States says, I cannot support this any longer. So they send a direction out to basically shut this down. One person rebels because he's going to preserve this environment that they have carried up there. But I think space triggers so many different elements. I mean, just from a standpoint of medicine, I'm a cardiac patient, okay? And basically I just think of all the marvelous things they've done to me to just keep me going. I take a look at the foods that we eat. You know, that used to be a big thing that you get a great big can, it'd be that big around, but this was before frozen food was invented. So the things that come about as a result of advancing technology, look at the cars you're driving. Right now the cars will keep you steering on the road. Some of them I don't like the idea of an autopilot car, but basically I would like one to keep me awake when I'm driving. The textbooks.
People were glued to the TV or the DV or the radio.
Yeah, the textbooks, television. But you know, the thing that was most amazing to me was when we first started off in space, we had no weather satellites, no communication satellites. We had 13 tracking stations around the world, 11 Earth-based and 2 ship-based, and we'd send controllers out there, and for a few minutes while the spacecraft's passing overhead, they could talk to the crew up there. But they had no way to communicate back to mission control what was going on. You know, we practiced high-speed printing, would you believe it? You bring a kid in from college and say, okay, we want to teach you how to produce messages rapidly. And you had, we were using a low-speed teletype, 60 words per minute kind of thing. And in order to get that message to the controller and back to mission control in the fastest possible way, you got to learn to print fast. Okay, because that's what the teletype operator is going to sit there and type this thing out. It was to the point where we'd send the ships out. We had no knowledge of the weather that was out there. Occasionally we'd end up in a typhoon, lose an antenna. We'd have to call upon the military to get it. It took almost a week to get many of our tracking stations because we didn't have jet air transports at that time. And it was just amazing. Within literally just about 4 years, all of a sudden, we started having relayed communications. We could now start communicating directly to things. The jet transports came about, so that made it a lot earlier there. The technology of power generation, we used batteries, but now we got fuel cells. You know, so this whole thing, computers, the computer on board the Gemini spacecraft was a 4,000-word machine. Then we stepped it up to a 64K machine on the Apollo, which is a big deal. But now you kept that much in your wristwatch in your automobile, and certainly more in your home. So these things here didn't come about normally. They came about as a result of a challenge. Okay, we were challenged to do something never been done before, go to the moon. But to do this, we had to have the instruments to do it. So now the question, if we want to go back to the moon, only now we're going to be there to stay. This isn't camping out overnight like you pick up your trap and go out to the local state park. This is going to be up there, and you're going to be a long ways away, and you better bring the right stuff, and it better be packaged small. It better work 100% of the time. So we're now at an era where we have the ability to build things as long as we have the challenge to build new things.
Dave, did you have any questions?
I just have one question. I'm going to let him go.
Yeah.
You're doing a great question.
Oh, thanks.
Been a fighter pilot,
Yes, sir.
aeronautical engineer,
Yes. Flight test engineer.
got the guts, leadership, the brains. Could have easily been you walking on the moon. How come? What did fate push you into this position?
That's interesting question. In the early days, whoops, I look at her. That's good
Yes,
point.
yes.
Good point. Tell me.
Please look at me.
Okay. Tell me to look at her.
Yeah,
as
there you
opposed
go.
to
There you go. Pretend I asked the question.
That guy's on top of the ball here. You know, in the early days of space, I came in as a fighter pilot. I'd done a couple years flight test on the B-52. And when I got in the space program, I was sort of intrigued, almost enamored. You know, the astronauts were rock stars. I wasn't interested in the rock star of it. I was interested in the job they're going to do. They're going to go up into space. And I really thought about would I be a good astronaut? And I had one event that changed my path very clearly. First of all, I didn't have this experimental test pilot background they needed. But the thing that changed my course of mind is I was preparing the flight plan for Deke Slayton, and I was just getting ready to carry over that flight plan over to him, and I found out that he had been scrubbed from the mission because he had this apparent heart problem. And Scott Carpenter was replacing him, and I thought, you know, these guys are only going to fly one mission in their life. And I've flown over 100. I've flown 17 as flight directors. I've flown another 60 to 70 as director of mission operations. So it's really a question. I had the opportunity to touch the crews and the missions and the discoveries and lead a team through these incredible efforts. So to me, it turned into a very challenging, overwhelming obsession kind of thing that you get from a flight director. You know, think about a flight director. He's got 15 to 21 people yelling at him in mission control over voice loops, giving him information in phrases that relate to engineering, science, space systems, status, right on the line. He has to put these pieces together in some semblance of order, look at a clock, and say, decision time, here's what we're going to go. So it's, to me, I think, a good analog for what the crew has to do in space.
Well, I'm so glad we got to tell your story today. And I know you mentioned that these stories will live regardless of the physical being because of people like you who are sharing it. So thank you.
Well, I'm sure you do, because all the digital capabilities there, you can actually go in the cloud, but do you keep some kind of I was flying with Lone Star for a while, and we started establishing oral histories. And that was very interesting to go back in, and I'm using them right now in my book as I'm going back and tracking some of my guys down.
And Frank Hughes is also oral.
Got it, okay.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I know you brought your vest, so since you brought it, did you want to use it?
It's up to you. It's up to you.
Can we have just him, before you leave, could you put it on? Is that okay?
This is one I
and is he good to walk
came
around?
Here.
Okay.
This one it came here. This is one, the reason I got it, brought this one today, is it came from Jim Lovell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he got me nominated in the National Aviation Hall of Fame.
Is everybody
locate
ready?
His microphone. It's on
There
his.
you go.
Okay, does he need his microphone, Byron? Or no?
I don't think it needs that. Oops.
Okay, he doesn't need it.
You
Okay.
don't need it.
All right, so we're just going to get you putting this on, and just go ahead and explain to me what the history of this.
This is one that Jim Lovell and I, after the Apollo 13, we developed a relationship, but basically when the book came out and then it was made into the movie, Jim had more speaking engagements, more opportunities, so he gave me a call and said, would you like to give a shot at this? So basically he and I started doing what we call our dog and pony shows. Sometimes he'd do one by himself, I'd do the other. In fact, we're coming up, we're going to do one down in Galveston, the end of the month, where we got myself and Fred Hayes, and I won't say that Jim's going to be there because that's a secret from the people that we're going to be talking to. But basically, for the National Aviation Hall of Fame, they have a great big pomp and ceremony kind of thing where they give this medal right on the line. And Jim knew about the story of the vest, so basically he had a vest made for me. And in addition to getting the medal, he put it on up in Dayton in front of the crowd up there. So it's one of my favorites. It's the only one that fits is one of the other reasons.
Right, your Apollo 11 one was white too, right?
yeah.
Go ahead and put it on.
Okay.
So this isn't the Apollo 11 one, but it is white.
Apollo 11 was a very interesting one. That was a one with a silver thread. It was white with the silver thread embedded in it. And you got the red, white, and blue one over there, which is the most tough, difficult one. There we go. See, this fits. The other ones don't. Okay.
Putting on a glove, right?
I quit smoking many years ago. I was flying aerobatics, and my flight surgeon said, "Yeah, if you're going to do this, so you're going to get grounded. So you better quit smoking." Boy, that was the ultimate threat. There we go.
Does it feel different putting it on? Does it feel significant putting it on?
Yes, it does.
Why?
It basically says it's time for business. Business time.
Part of mission control. I mean, this is exciting, this project.
Well, this is, it's every person, every event has its time. And the 50th anniversary is really, I think, a great event. We celebrate every year, but special years we have. And fortunately, Space Center Houston is becoming our sponsor for our events right now. So they're helping us all out there. We used to, when I was the division chief in mission control, I had the biggest party fund in the federal government. And right now, the party fund is becoming Space Center Houston, which is pretty neat.
Now, I know they want you to just kind of show me and walk me through as actively as you can what we're looking at.
I'll show you the magic thing about this TV tube here.
Okay.
Okay, if you got tired of white and black, you could throw the switch and it'd be black and white. So this sort of made it, controllers would flick it periodically to sit and say which one fits in. This here is manual display. Basically you dial in the TV channel you want to look at. Here's the one. These are basically event lights. These were all status. Every one of my controllers, these had a red, amber, and green light on them. So basically, if a controller wanted to talk to me, I was talking to some other guy, and they gave me an amber. That means, hey, when you get a chance, come to talk to me. If they give me a raid, it says, talk to me now. So basically, they had various symbols here. Now, the one thing you don't have is one of the old rotary dial telephones, which is in here. But basically, these push buttons all provided certain things. This here brought up specific displays for you for the space system. All these labeled, we had neat labels going on there. Those that wouldn't fit in this matrix, we use this guy with. They don't have an abort switch down here. These were the grips that when we finally were getting down close to the surface to grab a hold, I was down over here. I had a hold of that sucker and I was really holding in. I was going, it wouldn't get away from me.